The grand reception hall of Unity Spire stretched out like a crystal palace. Floating high above a world that belonged to no one species, it was neutral ground, where hundreds of alien races gathered to talk instead of fight. Ambassador Sarah Chun stood near the refreshment tables, watching her daughter Maya bounce excitedly from one alien delegation to another. The child's eyes wide with wonder at creatures she had only seen in textbooks and videos back on Earth. "Mom, look," Maya called out, pointing at a floating jellyfish-like being that pulsed with bioluminescent colors. "It's a luminar. They talk with light patterns." Sarah smiled, her diplomat's face warm but her eyes constantly scanning the room-old habits from her military days never quite died. And bringing Maya to this reception had been a calculated risk. The council needed to see that humans were a family species, that they valued their young in ways that apparently made them unique among the stars. The Crethaxians entered the hall like they owned it, 7 feet tall, scales glittering bronze and green under the station's lights. Their reptilian faces fixed in what might have been expressions of superiority or simply their natural look. Sarah couldn't quite tell yet, as humanity had only been dealing with the Crethaxian Empire for 3 standard years. Commander Vexinar led their delegation, his ceremonial armor clicking with each step, medals of conquest hanging from his chest like trophies. He was a warrior through and through, and the way he looked at the other species made it clear he considered most of them beneath his notice. Maya, curious as always, had wandered toward the viewing window where holographic displays showed various council member worlds. She stood on her tiptoes, trying to get a better view of a beautiful water planet. Completely absorbed in the swirling blue ocean, Sarah was talking with the Pelsian trade minister, discussing shipping routes and tariffs, when she heard the sound, a small gasp, a shuffle of feet, and then a sharp crack that made every human in the room turn their heads with predatory precision. Time seemed to slow down. Maya was on the floor, one hand pressed to her face, her eyes wide with shock, and the beginning of tears. Standing over her was Commander Vexinar, his clawed hand still raised from the backhand strike he had just delivered. "Clumsy creature should watch where it walks," Vexinar said in heavily accented standard, his translator device making his words cold and mechanical. "It bumped into me." Among the Crethaxian, young learn respect through correction. The reception hall had gone absolutely silent. Sarah felt something cold and ancient rise up inside her, something that evolution had burned into every human parent over millions of years. But she kept her face perfectly calm, professionally neutral. As she walked across the hall to her daughter, she knelt down, checked Maya's face. There was already a red mark forming, and a small cut where one of Vexinar's claw tips had caught skin. Nothing serious, nothing life-threatening. But that didn't matter at all. Every human security officer in the room had their hands near their weapons, not drawing them but ready. The tension was thick enough to cut, and several alien diplomats began backing away, their own instincts telling them something very bad was about to happen. "Maya, honey," Sarah said softly, her voice eerily calm. "Go with Lieutenant Morrison. He'll take you to the medical bay." "Mom, I'm okay. Now." "Sweetheart." Maya recognized that tone. It was the voice her mother used when there was no room for argument. The little girl got up, holding Morrison's hand as the security officer led her toward the exit, and she looked back once to see her mother standing up. Turning to face the Crethaxian commander, Sarah Chen's face was still calm, still professional, still the picture of diplomatic composure, but her voice carried through the silent hall like a blade. "Commander Vexinar, you have committed assault against a human child on neutral council ground," she said, each word measured and precise. "I am formally requesting an immediate emergency session of the Galactic Council to address this incident." Vexinar made a sound that might have been laughter, his translator rendering it as a harsh bark. "Your soft species is oversensitive." The hatchling was clumsy, and I provided appropriate correction. This is how civilized races teach their young proper behavior. I see, Sarah said, and her smile didn't reach her eyes. Then we will let the council determine what is civilized. She turned to the other human personnel in the room. All human staff are to return to our quarters immediately. No one is to take any independent action. We do this by the law. As the humans began filing out in perfect order, too perfect, too controlled, some of the older alien diplomats began to feel uneasy. They had seen enough species to recognize when predators were holding themselves. That council arbiter Zelmoth, an ancient being whose species had been studying the stars when most others were still living in caves, watched the scene with all 6 of his eyes. He had read humanity's file when they applied for council membership, and there had been notes, warnings, sections highlighted in urgent red. He pulled up his datapad as the reception hall dissolved into worried chatter and began reading through the human dossier again, looking for the section he remembered from years ago. There it was, buried in the Xenopsychology report. Warning: human protective instincts toward juveniles. Operate at levels unprecedented in council species. History recommended. Protocol is to treat harm to human children as potential casus belli, regardless of intent or severity of injury. Human response to such incidents has historically been disproportionate to the point of species-wide mobilizations. OM looked up at the Crothaxian delegation, who were laughing among themselves, completely unaware of what they had just triggered. He tapped a command into his datapad, sending an urgent message to the council chamber. Emergency session required potential code vermilion. Situation: human juvenile harmed by Crothaxian officer. Recommend immediate crisis protocols within minutes. Representatives from 73 species were scrambling to reach the council chamber. And throughout Unity Spire, human personnel moved with quiet, purposeful efficiency that made the station's other inhabitants nervous in her quarters. Ambassador Sarah Chen sat with Maya, gently cleaning the cut on her daughter's face. And when Maya asked if everything would be okay, Sarah said, "Yes, sweetheart, everything will be fine." But her eyes were hard as diamonds, and her mind was already running through every legal code, every treaty clause, every diplomatic tool she had at her disposal. And if those didn't work, well, she had made one call before leaving the reception hall. The call had gone to Fleet Admiral Jang. Back in human space, she had said only 4 words. "They hurt my daughter." Jang had replied with 3. How many ships? And now, in the darkness between stars, human vessels were changing course. Their destination, Unity Spire, the galaxy, was about to learn a lesson. The council chamber filled within an hour, representatives rushing to their seats while their aides whispered frantically into communication devices. This was the fastest emergency session anyone could remember, and the tension in the air felt like static electricity before a storm council. Arbiter Zelmoth took his position at the central podium, his ancient form seeming to carry the weight of millennia as he activated the chambers. Holographic recording systems, everything said here would be preserved, studied, and possibly used as evidence in whatever came next. This emergency session is called to address an incident involving Ambassador Sarah Chun of the Terran Union and Commander Vexanar of the Crothaxian Empire, Zelmoth announced, his translator rendering his multitonal voice into something all species could understand. Ambassador Chun, you have requested this session. Please state your grievance. Sarah stood, and every human in the gallery stood with her in perfect synchronization. It wasn't planned, but it happened anyway. An unconscious display of unity that made several alien species shift uncomfortably in their seats. Commander Vexnar struck my 8-year-old daughter across the face with sufficient force to draw blood. Sarah said, her voice steady but carrying an edge like a knife. This occurred on neutral council ground, during a diplomatic function, without provocation or justification. I demand that Commander Vexinar be remanded to human custody to face charges of assault against a minor. The Krithaxian delegation burst into harsh laughter, the sound grating through the chamber's acoustics. Your species is weak beyond measure, Commander Vexinar declared, rising to his full impressive height. The hatchling was clumsy and needed correction. This is standard practice in civilized societies. Among my people, young who cannot learn through discipline do not survive to adulthood. That, Sarah said quietly, is precisely why you will face human justice, because you don't understand what you've done. Zelmoth raised 3 of his limbs for silence. The council recognizes this is a matter of cultural difference. Commander Vexinar acted according to Krithaxian custom. Ambassador Chun, surely we can resolve this through standard diplomatic channels. Financial compensation, suggested the Palsian trade minister eagerly. Human medical costs covered. Perhaps a formal apology. The Krithaxian Empire apologizes to no inferior species. Vexinar snapped. Sarah's expression didn't change. I reject any resolution that doesn't include Commander Vexinar facing human legal proceedings. You have 24 hours to comply. If he is not surrendered to human custody by then, every human citizen will withdraw from council space, and the Terran Union will suspend all diplomatic relations with the Galactic Council. The chamber erupted into chaos. Voices raised in dozens of languages. Translators struggling to keep up with the cacophony of protest and argument. You cannot threaten the council. The Vortian representative shouted, "You are a probationary member. You have no such authority." "I'm not threatening anyone," Sarah replied calmly. "I'm informing you of what will happen. You have 24 hours. I suggest you decide whether one Krithakian commander is worth losing access to all human resources, technology, and cooperation." She walked out of the chamber, and every human followed her, leaving the remaining species in stunned silence in his private study. Zelmoth pulled up the human files again, diving deeper into their history than he had ever bothered to before. What he found made his bioluminescent organs dim with concern. Zelner incident 57 standard years prior, when a Zelner exploration ship had accidentally killed 3 human children during an emergency landing on a human colony world. The Zelner had immediately apologized, offered restitution, done everything by council protocols. The humans had responded by declaring war, not a limited engagement, not a border dispute, total war. The Zelner Empire, which had controlled 14 star systems and commanded fleets numbering in the thousands, had ceased to exist within 2 years. Their worlds occupied, their ships destroyed, their people scattered. Humanity had negotiated their surrender, but only after the Zelner High Council was dissolved and their entire military structure dismantled. The council had mediated the peace, but the message was clear. Human children were untouchable. Zemos found more examples throughout human history. Wars started over the murder of royal children. Nations toppled for enslaving juveniles, and a consistent pattern in their fiction and entertainment. Heroes who protected children were celebrated. Villains who harmed them met terrible fates. There were scientific studies included in the file. Human brain chemistry changed when their young were threatened. Hormones flooded their systems, turning even peaceful civilians into calculating, relentless pursuers of justice or vengeance. Dr. Yix, a hexapod xenopsychologist, had written a paper included in the files, Human Juvenile Protection Response, an evolutionary imperative. The paper explained that humans, unlike most species, invested enormous resources in few offspring. Their young were helpless for years, requiring constant protection. Species that raised hundreds of spawn at once could afford to lose some humans. Could not. Evolution had made them into something terrifying. When their children were threatened, they became intelligent, cooperative apex predators with very long memories and absolutely no sense of proportional response. Meanwhile, throughout Unity Spire, human civilians began packing, scientists abandoned their research projects. Engineers left construction sites. Doctors finished treating current patients, but took no new ones human run. Businesses closed their doors with polite signs, temporarily suspended pending diplomatic resolution. The exodus was orderly, calm, and absolutely comprehensive within 12 hours. 17,000 humans had boarded civilian transports and begun leaving. Council Space Admiral Jiang's fleet arrived at the outer marker of Council Space after 15 hours, 342 ships, ranging from massive carriers to small frigates. And they didn't attack or threaten. They simply formed the perimeter and waited every ship that tried to leave. Council Space was turned back with polite messages. Council Space is temporarily quarantined pending resolution of diplomatic incident. No vessels will be permitted to pass. Every ship trying to enter received the same message. Trade stopped. The economic analysis came in within hours. Humans represented 32% of the Council's skilled technical workforce, 41% of agricultural exports, and 67% of advanced medical research. Without them, dozens of species would face immediate shortages within a standard month. The Council's economy would begin collapsing, and still, the human fleet just sat there, weapons powered down, shields at minimum, not attacking, just waiting. Commander Vexnar appeared on public communication channels, his face filling screens across Council Space. "I will not surrender to these soft mammals," he declared. The Krathaxian Empire does not bow to threats from species who coddle their weak young. He uploaded footage from Unity Spire's security systems, Maya's frightened face as she fell, her tears, her small hand pressed to her bleeding cheek. "Look at their weakness," Vexnar proclaimed. "They cry over one small hatchling's tears. This is why they will never be warriors." In the council chamber, Zelmoth watched the broadcast and felt something he had not experienced in 300 years. Genuine fernet, fear of violence, fear of what was coming next, because he had seen this before. In the histories of a dozen fallen empires who had made similar mistakes, the moment when a species crossed a line they didn't even know existed, Sarah Chen appeared on human channels moments later. Her face composed, but her eyes carrying something ancient and cold. "Commander Vexnar, you have made a terrible mistake," she said simply. "We gave you a path to resolve this peacefully. You chose mockery instead. Very well. Now you will learn what happens when you hurt human children." The countdown clock showed 8 hours remaining, and in the darkness, more human ships were coming. Zalmoth's study had become a war room of sorts, filled with holographic displays showing human history, their psychology files, and economic projections that grew more dire by the hour. He had summoned Dr. Yix, the hexapod xenopsychologist, hoping for insights that might prevent what he increasingly believed was inevitable catastrophe. "Explain it to me," Zelmoth said wearily. "Why are they like this? Most species protect their young. Yes, but not like this, not with this intensity." Dr. Yix settled onto her specialized chair, her 6 limbs adjusting for comfort as she pulled up her research. It's evolution, Arbiter. Humans are what we call K-strategists taken to an extreme. They produce very few offspring, sometimes only 1 or 2 in their entire reproductive lifetime. Many species do the same. Yes, but human young are uniquely helpless, Dr. Yix interrupted, her enthusiasm for her subject overriding protocol. A human infant cannot walk for nearly a year after birth. It cannot feed itself for years. It requires constant attention and protection for over a decade to reach even basic independence. Some argue humans don't reach full maturity until their mid-20s. She pulled up comparative charts. Compare this to Krathaxian hatchlings, who can hunt within weeks, or Pelsian spawn, who are born essentially self-sufficient human. Children are vulnerable for an absurdly long time. so they evolved protective instincts, not just instincts. Arbiter, they evolved an entire suite of psychological, social, and biological responses. Dr. Yix's upper limbs gestured at the displays showing human brain scans. When a human perceives their child is threatened, their brain chemistry changes dramatically. Stress hormones surge, pain tolerance increases, and most importantly, their capacity for long-term planning becomes laser-focused on eliminating the threat. Zelmoth studied the data. This seems excessive from an evolutionary perspective. It was necessary. Dr. Yix explained. Human evolution occurred on a death world. Earth had predators that specifically hunted their young. There are records of creatures called lions that would kill human infants to make females receptive to mating again. There were wolves that saw human children as easy prey. She brought up footage from Earth's nature preserves. Humans who didn't protect their children with absolute ferocity had those children die. The genes for moderate protection were weeded out over millions of years. What we see now is the result. Humans who will sacrifice anything, risk everything, and destroy threats completely to ensure their children survive. The display shifted, showing human history through the ages. Look at their wars, Dr. Yix continued. The Crusades, partially justified as protecting Christian children from perceived threats. The World Wars, where propaganda focused heavily on protecting children from enemy forces. Their Geneva Conventions specifically enumerate protections for juveniles. More examples flooded the screens. Human legal systems where crimes against children carried the harshest penalties. Human fiction filled with stories of parents becoming unstoppable forces when their children were threatened. Even human criminals, imprisoned for terrible crimes, would form informal justice systems that dealt most harshly with those who had harmed children. This is pathological. Zelmoth murmured, "No. It's human," Dr. Yix corrected gently. "And we saw what happens when species don't understand this. May I show you the Zellner War?" Without waiting for permission, she pulled up the files. The Zellner incident had seemed minor at first. An exploration vessel, low on fuel, made an emergency landing on a human agricultural colony. The landing site was poorly chosen, and the ship's engines incinerated a farm building where 3 human children had been playing. The Zellner captain immediately contacted colonial authorities, expressing profound regret. The Zellner Empire offered restitution, punishment for the captain, and substantial financial compensation to the families. The human colonial government accepted. The families did not within a month. Human fleets were mobilizing. The Zellner Empire protested to the council, arguing that the humans were being unreasonable, that accidents happened, that the Zellner had done everything right according to council protocols. The council agreed and urged humanity to stand down. Humanity's response was a declaration of war against the Zellner Empire. It wasn't rational. Dr. Yix said quietly. The Zellner had 14 systems, thousands of ships, billions of citizens. Humanity at that time had 7 systems and a much smaller fleet. By every calculation, humanity should have negotiated. The hollows showed battles, human ships fighting with a ferocity that stunned observers. They took casualties that would have made other species surrender, but kept coming. They didn't just defeat Zellner fleets. They pursued them to their home systems and beyond. The Zellner tried to surrender after 8 months. Dr. Yix continued. Humanity refused unless the Zellner government stepped down entirely and allowed human oversight of their protocols for interacting with other species juveniles. The Zellner refused, and within 2 years, their empire no longer existed, not destroyed in the sense of genocide, but completely dismantled. Every Zellner world occupied, every military asset captured or destroyed, every government official tried for what humans called criminal negligence resulting in child deaths. Zelmoth felt his organs pulse with distress. And the council allowed this? The council couldn't stop it. Human ships ignored all ceasefire orders. Human diplomats walked out of every negotiation session. Humanity essentially told the council, either you stand with us on this, or you are irrelevant in the end. The council mediated the final terms, but only after humanity had already won. More examples followed. The small conflicts, the border disputes, the trade disagreements, and in every case where children were involved, humans became immovable, unreasonable, and willing to sacrifice economic benefits, political advantages, and diplomatic goodwill. They have a saying, Dr. Yix noted. Pulling up human cultural files. Mama bear. It refers to earth creatures called bears, where the females with cubs are considered the most dangerous animals on the planet. Humans use this term to describe parents protecting their children. There's another saying, hell hath no fury like a parent whose child has been harmed. It's a modification of an older quote. But the sentiment is clear. The displays showed human entertainment, movies, books, games, all filled with narratives of parental protection and revenge. Look at this. Dr. Yix highlighted one human film. A man's dog is killed and his house burned, but the trigger for his rampage of revenge. The dog was a gift from his dead wife, connecting him to his role as a would-be father. Human audiences found this sympathetic enough to spawn multiple sequels. Or this. Another film appeared. A father's daughter is kidnapped. He uses a particular set of skills to destroy an entire criminal organization. Humans consider this heroic, or this examples flooded the screen. Parents saving children from monsters, from aliens, from disasters, from diseases. It's their most common narrative because it resonates with every human at a fundamental level. Zelmuth absorbed it all, feeling the weight of understanding settle over him. So Commander Vexnar didn't just strike a child. He triggered a species-wide response mechanism that has been refined over millions of years. Yes, Dr. Yix confirmed, and by mocking Maya's tears on public broadcasts, by calling humans weak for protecting their young, he's done the worst possible thing. He's challenged their fitness as parents. What will they do? Dr. Yix's limbs trembled slightly. They've already started. They've isolated Council space economically. They've demonstrated their ability to blockade our territory. They've shown they can bring hundreds of ships to bear within hours, and they haven't fired a single shot yet. Human history shows they prefer to win without violence when possible, but if forced to fight, they don't stop until the threat is completely neutralized. Dr. Yix pulled up projections. If the Carthaxian Empire doesn't surrender Vexnar, humanity will likely demand more. Changes to Carthaxian laws regarding juveniles, oversight of their cultural practices, possibly even occupation. The Carthaxians will never accept. Then there will be war. And the Carthaxians will lose, maybe not immediately, maybe not easily, but they will lose because humans, when their children are involved, simply do not stop. Zelmuth looked at the countdown. 4 hours remaining. We have to make the Carthaxians understand, he said. I don't think we can. Dr. Yix replied sadly. Their culture is too different. They see Vexnar's actions as correct, as proper. Surrendering him means admitting their entire approach to raising young is wrong. Then what can we do? Dr. Yix gestured at the screens, showing human history, human psychology, human determination. We pray that Ambassador Chun is merciful. The countdown reached 12 hours when Commander Vexnar made his fatal mistake. He appeared on every major broadcast channel across Council space. His scaled face filled with what could only be described as contempt. I addressed the so-called Terran Union. His translator rendered his words with mechanical coldness. Your species demonstrates why you remain probationary members. You threaten the entire Council over 1 week hatchling's tears. You display the emotional instability of primitives. He gestured and security footage began playing. Maya's frightened face filled billions of screens across hundreds of worlds. Her small hand pressed to her bleeding cheek, tears streaming down her face. "Look at this," Vexenar declared. "This is what terrifies the mighty humans." A small scratch, minor pain, and the child weeps like prey before predators. The Crethaxian young face worsened their first combat training at age 3. And they do not cry, they learn. The footage looped. Maya falling. Maya crying. Maya being led away by Lieutenant Morrison. "Your daughter is weak." "Ambassador Chun," Vexenar said directly to the camera, "and you are weak for coddling her. The Crethaxian Empire does not negotiate with species who cannot properly raise their young. We do not apologize for teaching a valuable lesson about awareness and respect." He leaned closer to the camera. "Withdraw your fleets. Remove your blockade. And perhaps the Crethaxian High Command will consider acknowledging that your primitive emotions were triggered. But we will never surrender a decorated warrior for the crime of proper discipline." The broadcast ended on Unity Spire. In the human quarters, Ambassador Sarah Chun sat very still. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her breathing was controlled, and her face showed absolutely no expression at all. Lieutenant Morrison, standing nearby with other security personnel, had never seen her like this, even when Maya was struck. The ambassador had maintained professional composure, but this was different. This was the stillness of a predator calculating its next move. "Ma'am?" Morrison ventured carefully. Sarah's eyes moved to him, and he involuntarily took a step back. There was something in her gaze that reminded him of training videos he'd seen about Earth's apex predators. Patient, intelligent, and absolutely committed to their objective. "Get me a secure channel to Fleet Admiral Jang," Sarah said quietly, "and send a message to the Terran Union Council. Request authorization for Protocol Omega-7. Morrison's blood ran cold. Protocol Omega-7 was the designation for total economic and diplomatic warfare. It was the step before actual shooting began. The point where humanity stopped trying to be reasonable and started demonstrating exactly why they had survived evolution on a death world. "Ma'am, that requires—" "I know what it requires," Sarah interrupted. "Get me the Admiral." Fleet Admiral Jang's face appeared on the holographic display, his expression grim behind him. Morrison could see the bridge of the Avalanche, the flagship of humanity's third fleet, and the tension among the crew was visible even through the transmission. "Ambassador," Jang said simply. "Admiral, I need you to implement full quarantine protocols. Nothing goes in. Nothing comes out. Any ship that attempts to breach the perimeter is to be disabled and boarded. Disabled, not destroyed. We're not murderers, Admiral, but make it clear that we are absolutely serious." Jang nodded. "And when the Council protests?" Sarah's expression finally changed. She smiled, but it was the smile of someone who had just been given permission to stop being diplomatic. "Tell them they had 24 hours. They chose to spend those hours allowing Vexenar to insult my daughter on public broadcasts. They made their choice. Understood? What else? Begin broadcasting human history files on all Council frequencies. Specifically, every instance of what happened when humans' children were threatened. I want every species in Council space to understand exactly what Vexenar triggered. Some might see that as a threat. It's not a threat. Admiral, it's an education. Within an hour, human ships began broadcasting on emergency channels, not propaganda. Not threats, simply historical data presented in dry, documentary style. The Zellner War, detailed casualty reports, battle analyses, economic impacts, and the cause. Displayed prominently. 3 human children accidentally killed. Zellner Empire, unwilling to meet human demands for justice. The footage showed Zellner ships burning, Zellner worlds under occupation, Zellner officials being tried for criminal negligence. Then came others. Smaller incidents across human history. each annotated with causes and outcomes. A trade dispute with the Vortian collective that escalated when a Vortian merchant struck a human child during an argument. Humanity withdrew all trade for 3 years, nearly bankrupting the collective. A border skirmish with the Pelian Republic that became a 2-year conflict after Pelian soldiers used human children as shields during a hostage situation. The Republic formally apologized and paid reparations for a generation. Examples from Earth itself: wars, conflicts, social movements, all showing the same pattern. Humans could compromise on almost anything except their children's safety. The broadcasts included analysis from xenopsychologists, evolutionary biologists, and military strategists, all explaining, in academic language, why humanity responded this way. It wasn't propaganda, because it wasn't trying to convince anyone of anything. It was simply showing what had happened, what would happen, what always happened when you crossed this particular line with humanity. The Carthaxian High Command watched the broadcasts with growing unease. They were warriors. Yes, but they were also survivors who had built an empire through understanding their enemies. The Lord Marshal of the Carthaxian fleets contacted Commander Vexinar directly. You will surrender yourself to human custody immediately. What? Vexinar's shock was evident even through the translator. My lord, I acted within our cultural norms. You have endangered every Carthaxian in council space. The Lord Marshal interrupted. Human civilians are already withdrawing. Human ships have implemented a blockade. And these broadcasts show that humans do not bluff. They are patient, methodical, and absolutely committed when they're young or threatened. They won't actually attack. Did you watch the same broadcasts I did? The Zellner Empire had 14 systems. The humans reduced them to scattered refugees within 2 years. We have 9 systems, Commander, and our fleets are strong, but not invincible. We cannot show weakness. This isn't about weakness. The Lord Marshal's voice rose. This is about survival. Your actions have put our entire species at risk because you couldn't recognize that different species have different values. Vexinar's scales flushed darker with anger. The Carthaxian do not bow to mammals who weep over scratched hatchlings. Then the Carthaxian will be destroyed by those same mammals, the Lord Marshal said flatly. And our legacy will be that we were too proud to understand that universal rules don't exist. That what we see as strength, they see as cruelty. What we see as proper discipline, they see as an attack on their offspring. But Vexinar's pride wouldn't allow surrender. He cut the communication and began gathering supporters. Other Carthaxian officers who shared his views, who believed their empire shouldn't bow to what they saw as weakness within hours. He had nearly 24 followers, all convinced they were defending Carthaxian honor. They barricaded themselves in their section of Unity Spire, declaring that they would fight rather than submit back in human quarters. Sarah received the news with grim satisfaction. Vexinar had just transformed from a diplomatic incident into a legitimate military target. Ma'am, the Carthaxian are armed and fortified. Morrison reported, station security can't root them out without significant casualties. That's not our problem anymore, Sarah said calmly. Commander Vexinar is now a hostile combatant refusing lawful authority in form. Admiral Zhang, that we have a military situation requiring resolution. You're going to storm their position? No, Sarah corrected. We're going to wait. They have food for perhaps 3 days. Water for 5. Unity Spire's station master can cut environmental controls to their section. We'll simply wait for them to realize that stubbornness and stupidity are close cousins. The council called another emergency session. This one, filled with panic human broadcasts, had done their work. Every species now understood what was at stake. Ambassador Chun, Zelmoth pleaded, surely we can find a peaceful resolution. The Carthaxian High Command is willing to negotiate. Commander Vexinar is a hostile combatant who has taken illegal control of Council property. Sarah stated, "This is no longer a diplomatic matter. It's a criminal one. When he surrenders, he will face human justice. Until then, we wait, and your blockade remains in effect until this is resolved. You had 24 hours. You chose to spend them debating and watching Vexinar mock my daughter. Now you get to see what happens when humans stop being diplomatic." The holographic displays behind her showed the human fleet, now numbering over 400 ships, maintaining perfect formation around Council space and behind them. More ships were arriving with each passing hour. The galaxy was learning a lesson, and the lesson was this: you can negotiate with humans on almost anything: trade, borders, resources, technology, culture, but you never, ever hurt their children. The siege of the Crythaxian section lasted 37 hours, not because human forces couldn't breach the barricades, but because they simply waited while Commander Vexinar and his followers slowly realized they had trapped themselves. Station Master Quelix, a Pelian with excellent survival instincts, had immediately complied with Ambassador Chun's request to cut environmental controls. The temperature in the Crythaxian section dropped steadily. Lights dimmed to emergency levels, and the air recyclers reduced oxygen to minimum survivable levels. It wasn't torture. It was simply removing the comforts of modern station life on the second day of the siege. Something unexpected happened. The Crythaxian shuttle requested docking permission at Unity Spire. Aboard was Cruthval Felkira, Commander Vexinar's clutchmate, what humans would call his sister. She arrived in full ceremonial combat armor, scales painted with traditional war markings, and requested immediate audience with the Galactic Council. "I claim right of blood challenge," Valkyra announced in the council chamber, her voice carrying the formal tones of ancient Crythaxian law. "My clutchmate has brought dishonor upon our lineage through stupidity masquerading as strength. I formally challenge his right to command and his right to speak for our people." Zelmoth consulted his databanks rapidly. The Crythaxian right of blood. Challenge trial by combat between clan members. Is this recognized by your high command? "It is our oldest law," Valkyra confirmed. "Commander Vexinar has endangered our entire species through his inability to recognize that the galaxy does not operate by Crythaxian rules alone. He struck a human child and then mocked that child's pain on public broadcasts. This is not strength. This is foolishness." She turned to where Ambassador Chun sat in the gallery. "Ambassador, I cannot undo what my clutchmate did to your daughter. I cannot erase her tears or her fear, but I can ensure he faces consequences according to both our laws and yours." Sarah stood slowly. "You would fight your own brother?" "Among the Crythaxian, bloodline means less than honor," Valkyra replied. "And Vexinar has no honor. He failed to learn the most basic lesson of survival. Know your enemy. Respect their strengths and never mistake cultural difference for weakness." The challenge was issued publicly, broadcast across all channels. Crythaxian law was clear. Vexinar had to accept or forfeit all rank and status within hours. He emerged from the barricaded section, his followers dispersing quietly. The combat would take place in Unity Spire's main arena, witnessed by representatives of all council species. Crythaxian tradition demanded it be to first blood, not death, but the symbolism was clear. Vexinar and Valkyra faced each other across the combat space, both armed with traditional blade-stave ceremonial weapons that were nonetheless quite deadly. "You shame our clutch," Vexinar hissed, "siding with mammals over your own blood. I side with survival over pride." Valkyra responded, "You failed to understand what you faced. Humans are not weak because they protect their young. They are terrifying because they will sacrifice everything for that protection. They threaten our entire empire over one small scratch. No, they respond to an attack on their offspring with the full weight of their species' history. This is not about the size of the wound. Fool, it's about what the wound represents. The combat began Carthaxian fighting style was aggressive, powerful, built on millions of years of evolutionary predatory behavior. But Valkyra had done what her clutchmate had not. She had studied humanity, learned from their history, and understood that strength came in many forms. The fight lasted 4 minutes. Valkyra's blade staff found Vexenar's shoulder, drawing the required blood by Carthaxian law. She had won. Vexenar collapsed to 1 me, defeated, and by tradition. The victor's decision was absolute. Commander Vexenar. Valkyra announced formally, "You are hereby stripped of rank, title, and authority. You will surrender yourself to human custody to face their justice, and you will serve whatever sentence they impose." She turned to the council. The Carthaxian High Command supports this decision. We acknowledge that Vexenar's actions violated not just human customs, but the basic principles of diplomatic conduct. We formally apologize to Ambassador Chun and to Maya Chun. The trial was held 3 weeks later in human space. Vexenar was charged with assault of a minor under Terran Union law. And despite his initial defiance, the evidence was overwhelming. Maya herself testified, her voice small but steady. "He hit me because I bumped into him by accident. I said I was sorry, but he hit me anyway." The jury deliberated for less than an hour. Guilty. The sentence: 10 years of supervised rehabilitation, specifically working with human child welfare organizations, learning about child development, protection protocols, and the psychological impacts of violence against juveniles. It was, by human standards, a moderate sentence, but the symbolism was powerful. Vexenar would spend a decade learning exactly why his actions had been wrong. The council convened for a historic session. 3 months after the incident, representatives from all member species gathered to vote on what would become known as the Terran Juvenile Protocol. Ambassador Sarah Chun stood before them, Maya at her side, the small scar on the child's face visible as a reminder of what had brought them to this moment. "We don't ask you to understand why we protect our children with such intensity," Sarah said calmly. "We don't expect your species to feel what we feel, but we demand that you respect it. The Terran Juvenile Protocol is simple. Any act of violence against human children, whether intentional or accidental, whether minor or severe, will be treated as an act of aggression against humanity as a whole. This is not negotiable, not subject to cultural relativism, and not open to debate." She looked around the chamber. "We understand this makes us seem extreme, perhaps even irrational. We accept that judgment. What we will not accept is anyone treating our children as less important than diplomatic convenience." Zelmoth brought the measure to a vote. It passed unanimously. Even the Carthaxian delegation voted in favor. The protocol was entered into council law with a unique designation: Cultural Absolute, a classification reserved for rules that could not be violated regardless of cultural differences. Years past. Commander Vexenar no longer commander. Simply, Vexenar completed his sentence. In a development that surprised many, he chose to remain working with human child welfare programs, becoming an unlikely advocate for juvenile protection across species. "I was a fool," he said in an interview years later. "I thought strength meant dominance. That discipline meant pain. The humans taught me that true strength is protecting those who cannot protect themselves." Maya Chun grew up, and the scar on her face became a badge of honor among human children. Chun's mark, they called it. A reminder of the day the galaxy learned to respect human protective instincts. She eventually joined the diplomatic corps herself, following her mother's path, and her specialty became interspecies child welfare law. Ambassador Sarah Chun retired after 20 years of service. But her legacy, the Chun Doctrine, as it became known, remained the cornerstone of human-alien relations. The principle was taught in every diplomatic academy, every first contact training program, Every xenopsychology course across Council space, humanity will negotiate on virtually anything territory. Resources, technology, trade. But their children are absolutely non-negotiable. Any species that harms a human child, for any reason, will face the full response of humanity's protective instincts. This is not a threat, it is simply a fact on Unity Spire. 15 years after the incident, a new species was joining the Council, the Krillian, a mammalian race whose young were equally helpless and equally protected as human children during the orientation session. A Krillian diplomat asked nervously, "What if there's an accident? What if our children are harmed unintentionally?" The human liaison, a young woman with a small scar on her face, smiled reassuringly. "Then we'll investigate, determine cause, and work with you to prevent future incidents. We understand accidents happen. But the Terran Juvenile Protocol isn't about accidents." Maya Chun explained. "It's about respect for the fact that different species value different things. And for humans, our children are sacred. As long as others respect that, we're reasonable, patient, and willing to work through problems. And if they don't respect it..." Maya's smile didn't change, but her eyes carried something ancient. Something inherited from millions of years of evolution and thousands of years of history. They may learn the same lesson Commander Vexenar learned, that humanity's mercy is vast. But our protection of children is absolute. In his office, Zelmoth updated humanity's file one final time before his retirement. He had served as Council Arbiter for 400 years. And this would be his last official act under the section labeled Species Threat Assessment. He deleted the old warnings and replaced them with a single entry. Humanity status, ally friend. Recommended protocol, standard diplomatic relations with absolute adherence to Terran Juvenile Protocol. Cultural note, human protective instincts toward offspring represent evolutionary adaptation refined over millions of years. This is not policy, not culture, but fundamental biological imperative. Any harm to human juveniles will trigger species-wide response regardless of intent or severity. Historical pattern. Humanity prefers peaceful resolution but will